Hello, my name is Glody Banj, and in this video I'll be able to explain to you why it's more beneficial for endurance athletes to adopt a ketogenic diet rather than a high carbs diet. We should all know prior to exercise, consuming the right amount of food and when you consume the foods is very, very important. And to the highest level, when you get to elite level, it's even more crucial due to the marginal gains and the differences in players.
Carbohydrates, also known as saccharide, which comes from a group that is divided into 4 chemical groups, some of which contains glucose, which is used to replenish muscle glycogen. Muscle glycogen, however, is the fuel that is typically burnt during physical activities.
Extensive amount of research suggests that carbohydrates is the main source of fuel that needs to be used in all types of exercise, regardless of what it is. Well, that's not the case with us. What we're trying to demonstrate in this video is the usage of ketogenic diet and see how that will also impact performance, especially endurance athletes.
A ketogenic diet is well known for being a low carbs diet where the body produces what is known as ketones to substitute for the lack of glucose.
Ketogenic diet will have the highs of 70% to 80% of fat, 25 to 30% of protein, and 5 to 10, 15, maybe 20 at highest of carbs. Whilst your body is producing ketones, it's going through a process called ketosis, which is also when your body burns the body fat, which is known as triglycerides. Endurance athlete adopts a ketogenic diet, we should see an increase in the mitochondria, we should see an increase in expression of type 1 protein, we should also see angiogenesis, and last but not least, we should see the body transition into using fat as a main source of fuel. Angiogenesis is a physiological process in which new blood vessels are produced from pre-existing ones. Mitochondria are known as the powerhouse of cells. The more you have them, the more energy your cells will have them. But you probably don't see the benefit in knowing all the things that we've been talking about so far. However, this next step will explain to you and discuss whether or not these things are practical. So has it been tested? And when it's been tested, has it worked in different people? And essentially, the benefits that it has in overall performance. Well, now several studies will be discussed systematically in which it will provide you with a rationale and a clear understanding of ketogenic diet and how it influences athletes, especially endurance athletes and athletic performance in general. The first paper we'll be looking at will be Hansen et al. 2005, entitled Muscle Adaptation, Training Twice Every Second Day versus Training Once Daily. Answer the question of whether it is a lack or a surplus of substrate that triggers the training adaptations. One leg was trained under the depletion of carbohydrates, whereas the other leg wasn't. The subjects were exposed to a highly demanding physical exercise, which saw them perform a 1 and/or 2-legged knee extensor, which is demonstrated in the short clip. Time till exhaustion was recorded prior to the exercise and also after the 10 weeks of exercise. Initially, prior to the testing, they were performing 75% of the 1 rep max. During the exercise, however, they were performing 90% of their 1 rep max. The study found that the time till exhaustion was doubled in the low carbohydrate in comparison to the high carbohydrate, and the work performed in the low carbs was significantly larger too. Furthermore, the research showed no improvement in the capillaries or muscle fibers. However, the content of mitochondrial enzyme was measured after 5 weeks and 10 weeks, which showed that citrate synthase and dehydrogenase were greatly elevated in the low carbs group as well, which gives an indication that, this exercise has increased the ability to metabolize fat. So judging from this testing, the findings suggest that training on low carbohydrate enhanced time till exhaustion, which in theory is decreasing the rate in which an athlete runs out of energy. However, there are some areas in which we need to look into more scrutiny whilst deciding whether or not this is actually the case. So, theoretically speaking, this study clearly demonstrates that low carbohydrate diet showed a greater adaptation to the 10-week training program and was more effective and would promote fat metabolism, which then in theory increases in endurance phenotype, improving performance. For critique and limitation to this study, they utilized untrained athletes, which could play a massive part in the increase demonstrated in the 10 weeks of training. Furthermore, it will question the validity due to the lack of training within the subjects. On a more positive note, the study was within subject design, therefore making the results more reliable because it's within subject. Another factor to take into consideration is the fact that there was no way of putting a placebo effect group, which could also aid individuals who are trying to compare data and see if this actually does work. Furthermore, whilst exercising at 90% for 5 minutes of peak power isn't relying on fats, it is rather relying on carbohydrate due to the intensity of the exercise. Furthermore, the actual exercise used for testing is questionable because it is difficult to relate it to sports, as most sports, especially endurance sports, you use your whole body. Whereas strangely, this has only used a kicking-like technique to complete the actual test. However, this study is still very, very positive, as it is one of the first studies that used and tested depletion of carbohydrates during training. So, one massive downfall of this was genuinely the fact that they did not use the whole body, because most exercises uses the whole body and different muscles, which in our next one, Volek tries to combat this by using a treadmill rather than a kicking exercise. Volek's method consisted of 20 elite male athletes, marathon runners and Ironmen between the age of 21 and 45, which included participants whose dietary preferences were already ketogenic between the period of 9 to 20 months, which made it easier to put them into different categories whilst trying to put athletes into different groups. Furthermore, the participant performed 64% of their VO2 max 180 minutes of running on a treadmill, which already, in comparison to our previous study, is looking at a lower intensity for a prolonged period of time, which is a more adequate method of testing for endurance athletes. The results were collected from blood and muscle biopsies of vastus lateralis. Volek's method consisted of 20 elite male athletes, marathon runners and Ironmen between the age of 21 and 45, which included participants whose dietary preferences were already ketogenic between the period of 9 to 20 months, which made it easier to put them into different categories whilst trying to put athletes into different groups. Furthermore, the participant performed 64% of their VO2 max 180 minutes of running on a treadmill, which already, in comparison to our previous study, is looking at a lower intensity for a prolonged period of time, which is a more adequate method of testing for endurance athletes. The results were collected from blood and muscle biopsies of vastus lateralis. First limitation is that it was stopped at 60 minutes, which allowed the athletes to rest. And this could affect the results of some sort because they have rested in between the exercise. Furthermore, performance was not measured either, which could suggest that even with all these adaptations that we are seeing as a pattern, there is still no significant meaning because none of them actually tells us that there is an increase in performance. The last paper I'll be looking at will be the effect of a ketogenic diet on exercise metabolism and physical performance in off-road cyclists by Zahag et al. 2014. The research include 8 male subjects aged between 28 and 31 years of age, who completed an off-road cycling training with experience of at least 5 years and a minimal VO2 max of 55 milliliter per minute. Each cyclist performed a continuous exercise protocol on a cyclogometer with varied intensity after a mixed and ketogenic diet in a crossover design. Participants' testing lasted 3 days and was preceded by either 4 weeks of mixed diet or low carbohydrate, otherwise known as ketogenic diet. The findings were that ketogenic diet stimulated favorable changes in promoting the phenotype for an endurance athlete. Furthermore, a significant increase in the relative values of maximal oxygen uptake and oxygen uptake lactate threshold also after a ketogenic diet. Creatine kinase and dehydrogenase activity were significantly lower at rest during particular stages of the 105-minute protocol following low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. What we're able to see here is that there is clear adaptations that occurs to the body whilst endurance athletes adopt a ketogenic diet. However, there needs to be more research put onto the longitudinal studies to assess whether or not that these adaptations actually improve performance. In terms of benefits of a ketogenic diet, it will be very beneficial for endurance athletes because these adaptations will allow them and gives them access to a bigger and much more fuel to use during exercise. However, if you're looking at intermittent sport, for instance, which combines the two, which needs endurance and speed, this might not be ideal for them to adopt this type of diet.